5 U.S. aircraft carriers launched 380 aircraft in the largest coordinated naval airstrike in history. In 4 hours, they drop 240 weapons and destroy 290 targets across 600 miles of Chinese territory. July 9, 2025, Western Pacific, 400 nautical miles east of China. At 3:17 a.m., 5 American aircraft carriers, USS Gerald R. Ford, USS Nimitz, USS Ronald Reagan, USS Carl Vinson, and USS Abraham Lincoln, were positioned in a line formation spanning 120 nautical miles of ocean. This represented the largest concentration of carrier striking power ever assembled. 5 nuclear-powered supercarriers with combined displacement exceeding 500,000 tons and air wings totaling over 380 aircraft. The carriers had been converging on this position for 3 days, executing the most complex naval coordination since World War II. Their mission: conduct an alpha strike so overwhelming that China's military infrastructure would be crippled before it could respond. The strategic context was critical. China had conducted a series of escalating military actions, including shooting down American reconnaissance aircraft, attacking Allied shipping, and threatening nuclear strikes against U.S. bases in Japan and Guam. Diplomatic efforts had failed. Economic sanctions had been ignored, and military leaders assessed that only overwhelming conventional force could deter further Chinese aggression without triggering nuclear war. The 5-carrier strike force represented America's answer: demonstrate the ability to devastate Chinese military capabilities from positions beyond China's effective reach. The target list, developed over weeks by intelligence agencies and refined continuously as new information became available, contained 290 high-value targets distributed across 6 Chinese provinces. The targets included 73 airfields and aircraft shelters, 62 naval facilities and ports, 48 air defense installations, 37 ballistic missile sites, 29 command centers, 19 radar facilities, 14 ammunition depots, and 8 critical bridges. Each target was assigned specific aircraft and weapons based on target hardness, air defenses, and strategic importance. Some targets would receive single precision strikes. Others would be hit by multiple aircraft carrying dozens of weapons to ensure complete destruction. At 4 a.m., flight operations began. USS Gerald R. Ford, the newest and most advanced carrier, launched first. Within 12 minutes, 84 aircraft, 60 F-35C Lightning IIs, 16 FA-18EF Super Hornets, 4 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, and 4 E-2D Advanced Hawkeye early warning planes were airborne and forming up. The other 4 carriers executed identical launch sequences with minor variations based on their air wing compositions. By 5:15 a.m., all 380 aircraft were airborne, organized into 5 strike packages, 1 from each carrier. The Air Armada's composition was carefully planned. The F-35Cs, with their stealth characteristics and advanced sensors, would lead penetrations into defended airspace and strike the most heavily protected targets. The FA-18s would follow, delivering the bulk of the weapons against secondary targets once air defenses were suppressed. The EA-18G Growlers would jam Chinese radar and communications throughout the strike, and the E-2D Hawkeyes would coordinate the entire operation from standoff positions, managing hundreds of aircraft across thousands of cubic miles of airspace. At 5:30 a.m., the strike packages began their approach toward Chinese airspace. The formation stretched across 200 miles, with each carrier's aircraft group maintaining designated altitudes and routes. Total weapons load was staggering: 480 JDAM precision-guided bombs, 320 small-diameter bombs, 240 JSO glide bombs, 120 LRASM anti-ship missiles, and 80 HARM anti-radiation missiles. Combined explosive power exceeded 600 tons, The strike represented more firepower delivered in a single mission than most nations possessed in their entire arsenals. Should carrier strikes prioritize stealth penetration or overwhelming force, or combine both approaches? Type A for stealth-first tactics. Type B for mass strike overwhelming defenses. Comment your reasoning. At 6:15 a.m., the first wave entered Chinese airspace. 60 F-35Cs, flying at 35,000 feet and leveraging their stealth to avoid detection, penetrated air defense zones that would have been impassable for conventional aircraft. Chinese radar operators detected unusual patterns, brief contacts that disappeared, anomalous returns that didn't match known aircraft types, but couldn't generate firing solutions for their SAM systems. The F-35s reached their initial targets, air defense installations along the coast, and began releasing weapons. At 6:23 a.m., 80 AGM-88G HARM anti-radiation missiles launched from EA-18G Growlers and F-35Cs, homing in on active Chinese radar emissions. These weapons, designed to destroy radar systems by following their electromagnetic signals, struck S-400, HQ-9, and HQ-16 air defense batteries across a 200-mile front. Within 4 minutes, 19 Chinese air defense sites were destroyed or severely damaged, creating gaps in coverage that subsequent strike waves would exploit. At 6:30 a.m., the second wave struck. 120 F-A-18 Super Hornets, carrying the bulk of the strike's precision-guided munitions, penetrated through the gaps created by the F-35s and HARMs. The Super Hornets, while not stealthy, were now operating in airspace where Chinese air defenses had been suppressed or destroyed. They began releasing weapons against the primary target set. Subscribe to Navy Mission now for the most comprehensive carrier aviation warfare coverage. This is the ultimate analysis of naval air power projection. At 6:35 a.m., the coordinated strikes reached their peak intensity. Across 6 Chinese provinces, weapons were impacting targets simultaneously. At Longwan Air Base near Wenzhou, 12 GBU-31 JDAM bombs struck aircraft shelters, destroying 23 Chinese fighters on the ground. At Zhangqiao Air Base near Hangzhou, 16 small-diameter bombs penetrated hardened shelters and destroyed maintenance facilities. At Ningbo Naval Base, 8 LRASM anti-ship missiles struck destroyers and frigates at their moorings, sinking 4 vessels and severely damaging 3 more. The strikes continued in waves. At 6:42 a.m., ballistic missile storage sites in Zhejiang Province were hit by 32 JDAM bombs that collapsed underground facilities and destroyed mobile launchers. At 6:48 a.m., command centers coordinating Chinese military operations were struck by precision weapons that demolished communications equipment and killed senior officers. At 6:55 a.m., radar installations providing early warning of air threats were destroyed by HARM missiles and direct attack munitions. Chinese air defenses, despite suffering devastating losses, fought back. Between 6:45 and 7:15 a.m., surviving SAM systems launched approximately 240 missiles at American aircraft. Chinese J-20 and J-16 fighters scrambled from inland bases, engaged the strike packages attempting to disrupt the attacks. The air battle that developed involved over 450 aircraft from both sides, making it the largest air engagement in history. At 6:58 a.m., an F-A-18E Super Hornet from USS Nimitz was struck by an HQ-9 surface-to-air missile while egressing from its target area. The pilot ejected successfully, but was captured by Chinese forces. At 7:03 a.m., an F-35C from USS Gerald R. Ford was hit by cannon fire from a J-20 that had achieved a brief firing position. The F-35's advanced damage tolerance kept it flying long enough for the pilot to reach international waters before ejecting. The pilot was rescued by U.S. Navy helicopters. At 7:12 a.m., an EA-18G Growler was destroyed by a Chinese PL-15 missile. Both crew members were killed. Between 7 and 7:30 a.m., The third strike wave hit remaining targets. Ammunition depots were destroyed by massive explosions that triggered secondary detonations visible from space. Critical bridges spanning major rivers were dropped into the water, severing transportation routes. Fuel storage facilities burned, creating smoke plumes that rose 10,000 feet. And airfields were cratered by cluster munitions that rendered runways unusable for weeks. At 7:45 a.m., as the strike packages began withdrawing toward the carriers, Chinese forces attempted counterstrikes. 36 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles launched from mobile launchers that had survived the strikes, targeting the 5 carriers. But the carriers' Aegis escort ships, positioned specifically for this threat, engaged the missiles with SM-6 interceptors. 34 ballistic missiles were destroyed. 2 penetrated the defenses but missed their targets, impacting ocean 2 kilometers from USS Carl Vinson. By 8:30 a.m., the first aircraft began recovering aboard their carriers. The landing operations, conducted simultaneously across 5 carriers, represented extraordinary coordination. Aircraft with battle damage landed first, followed by those with minimal fuel, then the remainder in organized waves. By 10:00 a.m., all surviving aircraft had recovered. The final count: 377 of 380 aircraft returned. 3 were lost, 1 pilot captured, 1 pilot rescued, 2 crew members killed. 14 more aircraft had sustained battle damage requiring repairs ranging from minor to extensive. The target assessment, compiled over the following hours using satellite imagery and signals intelligence, confirmed extraordinary destruction. Of 290 assigned targets, 287 were destroyed or severely damaged, a 98.9% success rate. The 3 targets that survived were deeply buried command bunkers that had withstood multiple direct hits. China's Air Force had lost 196 aircraft destroyed on the ground. The Navy had lost 11 surface combatants, sunk or damaged beyond repair. Air defenses were reduced by approximately 40%. Ballistic missile capabilities were degraded by an estimated 35%. And command and control systems were so disrupted that coordinating military operations would require weeks to restore. Do you think such overwhelming strikes constitute legitimate military action or excessive force risking escalation? Share your perspective below. The strategic impact was immediate and profound. China, having lost nearly 200 military aircraft, dozens of ships, and critical infrastructure in a single 4-hour strike, faced a stark choice: escalate to nuclear weapons and face mutual destruction, or accept conventional defeat and seek diplomatic resolution. Chinese leadership, recognizing that further conventional conflict would result in additional devastating losses, chose the latter. Within 48 hours, Chinese officials requested emergency diplomatic talks. For the United States Navy, July 9th represented the culmination of decades of carrier aviation development. 5 carriers had projected power across 600 miles of hostile territory, delivered over 1-100 weapons with precision, and returned with minimal losses despite facing peer adversary air defenses. The operation validated every aspect of carrier doctrine: concentration of force, coordinated strikes, advanced aircraft, precision weapons, and sustained operations. No other nation could execute such a mission. The demonstration of capability reshaped strategic calculations worldwide. For the 380 air crews who flew the mission, July the 9th became the defining moment of their careers. They had participated in the largest naval airstrike in history, facing the most advanced air defenses while delivering weapons that crippled a peer adversary's military. The 3 aviators who didn't return, the captured pilot, the rescued pilot, and the 2 who died, were honored as heroes who had helped prevent a wider war through their sacrifice and professionalism. The 5 aircraft carriers that had executed the strike returned to normal operations over the following weeks. USS Gerald R. Ford remained in the Western Pacific. USS Nimitz and USS Ronald Reagan rotated back to home ports for scheduled maintenance. USS Carl Vinson and USS Abraham Lincoln continued forward deployments. All 5 carriers had proven that even in an era of long-range missiles and cyber warfare, manned carrier aviation remained the most flexible, sustainable, and effective means of projecting conventional military power. As the sun set on July 9th, smoke from 290 destroyed targets darkened Chinese skies. The Air Force that had challenged American dominance was crippled. The Navy that had threatened Pacific security was devastated. And the military infrastructure that had enabled Chinese aggression was in ruins. 5 aircraft carriers operating from international waters beyond Chinese reach had accomplished in 4 hours what would have required weeks of land-based operations. The lesson was unmistakable. Carrier aviation, when properly employed and concentrated, remained the decisive factor in naval warfare. Now I want 3 perspectives from you. First, is concentrating 5 carriers justified by the mission, or does it create unacceptable risk? Second, what does this strike reveal about the continuing dominance of carrier aviation in modern warfare? Third, should such devastating strikes be limited to specific targets or employed against broad military infrastructure? Comment your detailed strategic analysis below. Your insights drive conversations on Navy mission. And if this breakdown of the largest carrier airstrike in history gave you new understanding of naval aviation power projection, prove it by hitting that like button, subscribing to Navy Mission, and turning on notifications. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay overwhelming, and remember that carriers exist to project power when nations need it most.